This is Cars and Bids, and today we are going to talk about vans. Surprisingly, we do very well with vans on Cars and Bids. I'm going to go through my 5 favorite vans that we've sold and then discuss sort of the van market in general. So let's get started. Okay, so vans on Cars and Bids. Now, I hadn't really even thought about vans being sort of a topic for anything until I went to research this video. I discovered that we have auctioned 45 vans on Cars and Bids, and we've sold 42 of them for a 93.3% sale rate. And I think there's a couple reasons for this, as you might guess. One is the pandemic. You know, vans and RVs have really been hot during the COVID pandemic. People can't really fly. They don't feel comfortable flying. They're not flying overseas. And so they're, hey, what else can we do to, have some fun and go on a vacation or adventure or whatever? And a lot of people are turning to vans. Vans with sleeper, with beds, with showers and kitchens and that sort of thing. And obviously, even before the pandemic, the whole van life thing was kind of getting hot. People living in vans, sleeping in vans, and traveling all over the country in vans. Just like it was in the 60s. Of course, now it's Sprinter vans that cost $100,000 or whatever, but we've also sold a bunch of vans that sort of allow people to do that, to go camping, to go out into the world and sow their wild oats, whatever. And so I want to talk through my 5 favorite vans that we have sold so far. And there have actually been quite a few that have been pretty interesting and pretty exciting. Okay, number 5 favorite van that we have auctioned thus far, at least of mine, is this 2002 Volkswagen Eurovan MV Weekender. So we've actually sold a few of these. This was the Eurovan, which was the Volkswagen van that was sold in the US from 92 to 02, I think it was. And there was a version that was just a regular van, but there was also a version with a pop-up camper. And those are the ones that are the most desired. This particular 2002 model sold for $32,000. Which it absolutely deserved because it had only 78,000 miles. A lot of these vans were bought to go on long road trips, and people throughout the 90s and the 2000s took them on long road trips. So you'll often find these with 200,000 miles plus. In fact, I seem to recall we sold another one of these recently back in June with 196,000 miles. And before that, we actually offered one with 169,000 miles and blah, blah, blah. Here's one with 205,000 miles. They're usually really high miles. So this particular one, this 2002 model, that sold for $32,000, it brought all the money. And it did so with no reserve, as no reserve vehicles tend to do. They tend to get a little bit more action. There's a little bit more interest and excitement in cars with no reserve. But it was interesting. These Eurovans are always cool to see in any form, but they're especially cool to see with the pop-top camper because they're just more desirable, more cool, and more versatile that you can really go and take them on a trip. And these vans are starting to get sort of this old school vintage feel to them. The Eurovans are. They're now at least 20 years old, some more than that. And so they kind of have this cool, you pull up at a rest stop next to somebody with a kitted out Sprinter. You're driving the OG here with the Eurovan, and that's kind of neat. Okay, next up, number 4 favorite van that we have auctioned on Cars and Bids. That would be this 1993 Toyota Previa. This was a cool car. It was a one-owner Previa with a manual transmission and 68,000 miles. And it was offered with no reserve, and it had a clean Carfax. It sort of checked all the boxes. Now, the one box it didn't check was it doesn't have the supercharged engine or all-wheel drive, but you couldn't get those things with the manual. So if you wanted a manual transmission, you had to get the regular engine and rear-wheel drive. But still, I think I would rather trade. The supercharged engine only got you like 170 horsepower, 160. It was a joke. Yeah, you would rather have a manual, and these were made with manual transmissions, as ridiculous as that sounds, and it was just cool. And of course, the Previa is kind of famous in general in the car world for being this ridiculous egg-shaped van that was technically mid-engined because the engine was behind the front axles and sort of in between the seats. And it's just a generally ridiculous and absurd vehicle. And to add a manual transmission, one owner, no reserve, it was just kind of cool to see it come up on the site. So this sold for $8,100, which honestly is a pretty good deal for something that is so unusual and kind of cool and relatively practical. I think this thing has a lot of life left in it at only 68,000 miles. And I hope whoever has it is enjoying themselves. It's a very unusual car that's getting more and more press and interest among car enthusiasts as this mid-engine Toyota minivan. And here's your chance to have one with a stick shift and rear-wheel drive. Okay, next up, number 3 favorite van that we have auctioned on Cars and Bids. This 2007 Mercedes-Benz R63 AMG. We classify these as vans here on Cars and Bids because technically it was a minivan. I realize it had rear opening doors instead of sliding doors, but so did the first Honda Odyssey, so did the original Mazda MPVs. This was a minivan in terms of its size, its shape, its seating capacity, seating layout. This was a van. But they didn't want to call it that. But it clearly wasn't an SUV, so Mercedes actually called it a Grand Sports Tourer, which makes no sense. We call it a van. Now, this is the high-performance version, the R63 with a 507 horsepower V8 inside a minivan with all-wheel drive, and this sold for $38,500, as it absolutely deserved to. Now, it was getting up there in miles, 89,000 miles, but this one had the head bolts replaced. That was the biggest problem with these vans. The engines had issues with the head bolts that would cause complete engine failure if it wasn't addressed. It didn't affect them all, but it affected enough of them that you kind of wanted to do that prematurely. But this van had it done, and that's what people are looking for when they go to buy these vans now. If the head bolts are done, people are like, yes, I will go buy it. They never really come up for sale because they only made something like 100 of them, or 120, or some ridiculously small number, 80, I don't remember. But it was a really special and weird and unusual vehicle, and I am always happy to have an R63 on Cars and Bids. We've auctioned 2 R63s on Cars and Bids. This one was the nicer of the two, with a $38,500 sale price. If you want a special van to transport your family like nothing else will, this is the one. Okay, next up, down to my 2 very favorite vans we have had on Cars and Bids. Number 2, this 1990 Toyota Hi-Ace Holiday Ace 4x4. So this was basically a Toyota Hi-Ace was a van that Toyota was making in the late 80s and early 90s, and this one sort of did away with most of the van components and replaced it all with a camper. And it was a pretty cool setup that was kind of interesting and neat. And it had a lot of stuff that you'd want if you were actually going camping. There was a sink, there was a refrigerator, there was a fresh water tank and water pump for it. There was a shower and a portable toilet in there. So you could do a lot of stuff and actually go camping with this. Now, this is an unusual vehicle. People do this in Sprinters, they do it in RVs, whatever. And showing up to a campsite in one of these, people be like, what is that thing? If they know anything about these. But it was a kind of cool and special car. And a little story about this van, the seller of this van pitched it. He had submitted it to us, and I didn't know what to ask for the reserves. I kind of went low, and he said, listen, this is a diesel 4-wheel drive RV. This is the hottest thing on the market right now. Just accept it with my reserve. And I said, okay, fine. You know, you seem to know more than I do. So I accepted it, and of course it sold, which it deserved to sell because it's cool and it's special, and he was indeed right. Diesel will last forever. 4-wheel drive means it can go anywhere, and it's also got a manual transmission, and it was imported to the US with US title. This was sold new in Japan. And it's just a very cool and interesting thing. And it's funny, the 25-year import rule has started to bring in some cool and interesting cars, but I never really thought about the vans and the trucks that it would bring in, and that's starting to happen too, including this cool camper, which is far, far cooler in the States than in Japan, where they're probably relatively common. Okay, number 1, last cool van, my favorite cool van we've offered on Cars and Bids. That would be this 1992 Mitsubishi Delica Star Wagon Exceed 4-wheel drive, ridiculous named vehicle. The Delica is starting to gain this reputation in the car world as a very cool and desirable 4-wheel drive off-road van that allows you to kind of go anywhere like a off-road SUV, but also bring your sleeping stuff with you. It's like a Jeep Wrangler as a van, essentially. Not as capable, but it's a similar idea. Now, the Delica is still in production. A lot of people don't know this, but there's still a current version of the Delica, and it came out years ago, but it's very different from the 80s and 90s versions. They offer it with 4-wheel drive still, I'm sure, but it doesn't have that kind of rough, tough look like these old early 90s ones. And this particular van was especially cool because not only was it a Delica, and not only was it diesel powered for extra reliability and fuel economy and range, but it had been specifically modified so that it could be used as like a camping and overlanding vehicle. And so it had a portable toilet, it had a sink, it had a water pump, it had a refrigerator and a freezer, it had a fresh water tank and a big mattress in back. This really was your opportunity to take a van off-road and then use it as a camper vehicle or whatever you were there, and that was pretty cool. Now, this sold for $21,250. Frankly, I think these Delicas are kind of bargains, given what they offer. But I think a lot of people are a little nervous about them because, you know, they're from a foreign country and we don't know how to get parts, whatever. Well, they've proven to actually be pretty reliable, and they're probably the coolest off-road vans that you can get, and certainly some of the most capable. We've sold a few Delicas on Cars and Bids, and the next generation Delica, which came out in the 90s, is actually starting to become legal. But it's the prior model, which was actually the 3rd generation. It's the prior model that people really want, the 80s and 90s one. It had great 4-wheel drive. A lot of them were lifted from the factory. factory. They had cool features, a lot of room in back, and kind of nice approach and departure angles for off-roading. And those are the really, really desirable ones. And they've done really well, and they've done well on Cars and Bits. And this one was especially cool in my mind because of the camping accessories. It really was kind of a four-wheel drive off-roader plus a camper all in one. So there you go. Those are some of my favorite vans. And who knew Cars and Bids did so well with vans? But we do. And that's some of my favorites and some interesting van market information from Cars and Bids.